Thank you for coming. This talk's going to be slightly different to some of the talks that you've probably had throughout the day. Not talking about tooling or tech, but very much people and kind of like touching on the Maslow SOC discussion that was presented earlier today. So, my name is Ryan. I'm the head of cybersecurity and a shareholder at Stripe IoT. And we're a Bristol and London-based MSP and MSSP providing managed security services, OffSec services, information security and managed IT. And I think through COVID, many businesses, particularly outside of the tech space, faced many, many issues, both with kind of adoption of remote working, but also the cultural adjustment that comes with it. And I've faced very much the same issue because the business was scaling very, very quickly, and we doubled in size in the last 12 months. And because of that, the kind of hiring strategy, especially in cybersecurity, is an issue for many. And maintaining and retaining the right people was always an issue, and it's been keeping those people at a certain longevity for you to enable growth. And so we found that there was significant trust relationship issues when building those teams through COVID, because the quick adoption of remote working and needing to be able to fulfill your obligations to your clients in a profitable but also proactive way. And I think many businesses faced this issue and didn't treat it as necessarily a human problem, but very much a systematic and system-based issue. And from my perspective and what I did with my teams was very much an enablement of trust and trying proactive to the issues that we were finding. And so with the enablement of that, we saw a huge increase in productivity and retention. And I'll take you through some examples, but also some of the client issues that we faced as well. So when I was providing consultancy to some clients, the issues they faced throughout this journey and the evolution of remote working, specifically in the tech-enabled world. And so the first thing we did was provide that kind of project and self-actualization piece that was discussed earlier. And if you weren't there, self-actualization is the real fulfillment in your role and your kind of self-pathway for success and when you really achieve that position. And so what we did was we brought the issues to the team to ask them how they would resolve problems. And what it enabled us to do was manage the risk to some businesses and the business culture by managing human error in a different way. And so what many businesses do, they might use phishing campaigns for HR metrics, or they might use it to understand which employees might be being bad, potentially. And I take a slightly different approach to that when, in fact, that might show the business isn't providing the right mechanism for support for some of these people. And so phishing campaigns used as a kind of a negative statistic was what we were seeing throughout the kind of COVID adoption period. And it was really important to kind of try and change that narrative for me. And so when someone does have an issue or they do something wrong or they do click something, they might not be the most educated in that field, but they need to get it to the person who does as quickly as possible, therefore managing the kind of human error element for that specific attack kill chain. And so what we did was we tried to enable those people to have those conversations in a proactive sense, so where making a mistake wasn't necessarily a negative, and it enabled that kind of mean time to respond and mean time to detect from a security operations perspective reduced massively. And so with that, we saw such an increase in kind of communication between the interdepartmental teams, and naturally through a COVID kind of remote working world, it really challenged the way we as businesses kind of operate and what tooling we use to provide us the metrics and the stats. And sometimes they could be negative. And so we took a step back, and for one of our clients in particular, we analyzed the way that they run as a business, but also their hiring process and their hiring structure. And specifically in cybersecurity, your culture can be kind of influenced by the backgrounds and the diversification. And so some businesses, you need to have XYZ qualification and XYZ degree to be able to meet the requirements to get through to the interview stages. And I challenge the industry in a way where I've seen junior analysts coming for their first job and having to go 4 rounds of interviews with 4 different decision makers. And I don't necessarily think that really drives the ethos and what we're actually trying to get from it. These people are trying to get their foot in the door and learn from us. And 4 different people having their own say might not be the most efficient way of getting those people into the right positions to understand their longevity and journey within cybersecurity. Like there's a saying around, if you measure a fish on its ability to climb a tree, you're never going to get very far. And if you're measuring someone's ability on how to detect and resolve an issue for a client versus a penetration tester, they can be similar, but the end result might be different. And so in my teams, my hiring strategy is quite different, where I like to think we build human capacity and support mechanisms through diversification. And so I don't mean that in the traditional sense. I mean that from my SOC manager, I hired purely on their basis for being able to manage and build efficient structures and high performance teams. So how do you enable your teams to be able to take those problems on instead of bring the issue up, across, and then down to the other department? Is very much more lateral focused, and how you can enable those people to take those challenges on. And so when I brought him in this particular instance, I saw a very different side to how teams were being managed. And what we actually saw was the backgrounds of our SOC analysts that we hired from there on out, and in other teams like information security and our offensive security practices, were not from necessarily your conventional pathway of you're going to go and get a degree in the appropriate discipline, and then you're going to get your first job and progress up through. So what we actually saw is the Simon Sinek performance versus trust matrix. I don't know if people have seen it, but he draws a y-axis and an x-axis, either or, and kind of says your high performance of high trust people are where you want to be. And trust in the sense that they're going to do right by you, but also your clients. And a high performance of low trust individual is someone of a toxic nature and a negative leader in your capacity. Maybe someone who looks after themselves, but not in the interest of the department and the team. And we saw many, many clients doing this, where they would go for the metrics and the stats. And don't get me wrong, all businesses need to operate in that capacity, and high performance is very important. But he references SEAL Team 6 being a high performer of high trust is your self-actualization piece, but a medium performer of high trust is where you might want to go instead of a high performer of low trust, because of how they might impact your business. And so we kind of took that on in our hiring strategy, and you can kind of see in the blurb that from my perspective, what I want to see from someone's CV, and people coming into the industry really struggle with this. I've done lots of mentoring, and I've had conversations with people trying to break into the industry, and we've got this cyber skills gap, when actually I believe we're hindering ourselves through the hiring strategy of 4 rounds of technical interviews when we're expecting people to know how to enumerate networks and things like that, when they've not been able to do that in production. And we all know that with certain Nmap flags and things like that, we Google them on a daily basis. So why are we asking it at interview stage? And so sometimes we hinder ourselves through negative interview processes. And what's more important to me is knowing if you're a volunteer paramedic on the weekends, or if you've done 4 years work experience in Wetherspoons, and you know people have got angry at you, and you can deal with those difficult conflicts and those high pressure situations. And so in the teams that I've hired, one of the key kind of things I've looked for, which you can't really write down, but you can only get through from conversation, is how do you deal with those ever-changing circumstances? And in a security world, that is every day, in my experience anyway. If that's not for you, then I'm pleased for you. And so what we've seen is hiring people that are able to navigate those difficult changing circumstances. So ex-military personnel are very, very good adopters into that kind of, that difference of world. And so what we saw was people who struggle to kind of adapt don't necessarily fit some of those roles necessarily, but could be very, very highly qualified. And so they might need something more static or not necessarily customer facing. And so by doing so, you understand the underlying metrics and kind of cultural fit. It enables you to be a bit more of a high performance mechanism. And so one of my team in particular, they were a scaffolder, and I was feeling willing, and I had a conversation with the guy, and it was Friday night on LinkedIn, and we were having a conversation, and they asked a question about how do you break into the industry. This person was as a scaffolder up north in Liverpool, working all the rainy shifts, and excelled to the peak that they could get to. But every evening they were going on Try Hack Me and trying to educate themselves, and they didn't have the resources or ability to put themselves through some of the certifications that the industry were demanding. And so I had this conversation, and what I saw was an overbearing kind of, a very highly infectious motivation to want to help customers and do the right thing and get out of a toxic working environment. And by doing so, we enabled a very, very positive business culture, and we've kind of done that through the difference of backgrounds. We've got people who have done biomedicine who are now working in kind of phishing and anti-phishing based on the analytical mindset. And we've got people who were working in healthcare where their ability to be able to explain to people is second to none. They can explain complex issues in a way that people can understand. And I'm sure we've got people sat here today where they have very, very technical people, but can't necessarily translate that into useful information for the end client. And so from all of this, what we've really tried to focus on is enabling our customers to do that, and enabling that trust relationship. And so when people do something wrong, it's not seen as a negative necessarily, and we see that as an area for improvement and an area that we can help develop them. And so coming right back around to kind of where I started, and the relationship of trust with COVID, and building those trust relationships and giving people the opportunity, it's actually really enabled our business to become way more efficient. And so because of that, because they feel enabled and because they feel that they can take on that next role or that next problem, and they have those pathways, we've ended up automating, I think, 29% of our initial triage into autonomous scale, so we can immediately escalate and give a better client service. But also, our SLAs have improved, the team culture's improved, and because of that, we've been able to incentivize that team relationship and bonding, where through cybersecurity, people can be quite introverted sometimes, and especially when you're working in your home environment, it's difficult to communicate and feel as a part of a team. And so things like away days are very important, but also team goals, where it's kind of them versus the business in some ways, where it might be a metric-based thing. So if your SLA is based on your team being able to perform at a certain level, what we did was we said we wanted to see a certain SLA for a certain time period on a certain challenging requirement. And we said, we don't necessarily mind how you do it. And it was kind of born out of a hackathon. And we enabled the team to come up with their own creative problem solving and their own solutions, and provided them the resources to do so. And within 3 weeks, we have consistently hit that and above the SLA that we set across all of our client bases, across 20,000 plus endpoints. And so effectively what the underlying message is around business culture could be your biggest asset. So both defensively, also operationally. So if you're not a cybersecurity business and you run your cybersecurity function within your business, building a relationship where people don't see you as a negative and you are an approachable resource, and if someone has an issue, your mean time to detect will improve, you'll be a more resilient but also a more efficient department. And if you are a cybersecurity business, enabling your teams to work interdepartmental. So for example, our head of offensive security was working with one of our security engineering team, and we were able to provide some detection logic to local councils and people who may not have the resources to be able to do so. And those kind of things come out when you don't kind of inhibit your teams and say, this is your task. And one of the previous talks today did touch on this. And it really kind of drove it home that these people are creative and can see the solutions often better than yourselves, and try to hire based on their cultural drive and inspiration, because not everybody has the piece of paper to get them through that front door sometimes. And so I've got one last thing, and it was around incentives and motivating your teams through the times of COVID. And it was really, really difficult for some. Lots of businesses having to reduce staff, but also lots of people looking for new roles and wanting to take the opportunity as a career change. And so what we did from an incentivization perspective was we wanted the teams to work more collaboratively, and we didn't want necessarily to have kind of siloed infrastructure. So what I mean by that is this team only operates as this team, and this team only operates as that team. And there's times and places for this, in a pinch of salt with the analogy maybe, but what we see is those teams solving issues before they become that kind of second or third line escalation, and then having to go to management and then come down the other pillar. And the incentive for us was we would buy gaming chairs for the teams that hit the certain SLAs. And it wasn't even about the product. It was about the goal, and that they all achieved it collectively. And so the business culture and the way that humans exist and the way we work together can also become your biggest defense mechanism that's not, a piece of software or a product. Thank you.